Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. It means so much to us as participants in the Men's Story Project at Colby College, as students on this campus, and as members of the Colby community, and as individuals that you've decided to share your time with us. We want to begin our event tonight with some words of acknowledgement. Many of us up here attended Take Back the Night, which the Colby Feminist Alliance and Women of Color Alliance hosted exactly 1 week ago in this auditorium on this stage. The stories that our peers shared were deeply moving and impacted us greatly. We were profoundly affected by what we heard, and we are inspired and honored by the depths of vulnerability and bravery that they displayed. We acknowledge that most of the survivors who shared at Take Back the Night were women and non binary people, and that most of the violence that they experienced here on campus and in the world was perpetrated by men, male identifying and masculine presenting people. This holds throughout history and for all societies. It is men who commit the majority of violence.
The Men's Story Project is an international project that engages participants in a series of educational and creative workshops in critical exploration of social ideas about masculinity. The goal of the Men's Story Project, like many healthy masculinities initiatives, is to strengthen social norms that contribute to the prevention of various forms of gender-based violence and the promotion of intersectional gender justice. In our weekly meetings over the past 3 months, we've built community, learned together, challenged one another, and interrogated our own beliefs, thoughts, actions, and experiences in relation to social ideas about masculinity.
We want to be transparent about the fact that we were hesitant to proceed with this storytelling event and public dialogue, which is the traditional culmination for men's story project groups. Even though most men are not violent, most violence is committed by men. We are accountable to the truth, one of many uncomfortable ones in a society characterized by patriarchy. So we question the impact that centering male identifying and masculine presenting people in sexual violence prevention efforts would have, especially given that we're on the same stage that our peers shared their Take Back the Night stories on.
We wish to make it clear that the stories we share tonight are not meant to overshadow, invalidate, or in any way detract from the stories that were shared by the courageous survivors at Colby last Friday. We wish to serve as allies and partners in the work to end gender-based violence, standing by their side in story and in space. We wish to share our stories tonight, not to put ourselves in the spotlight, but rather to shine the spotlight on and can critically consider social ideas about masculinity in order to help promote healthy and equitable masculinities. As such, we will be sharing our stories off to the side of the stage as a symbolic acknowledgement of the narratives that so moved us last Friday.
The stories you'll hear tonight address a range of issues, from gender identity and homophobia to mental health and emotional maturity, relationships with parents, between brothers, and amongst friends, dress codes and gender roles, consent and coercion, boundaries and intimacy, ignorance, compliance, resistance, and liberation.
By no means do the stories that we will present tonight represent the totality of experiences in the world, let alone in this very room. There are billions of stories that won't be shared tonight, and each of the stories that will be shared represent just one part of an ongoing journey. We are all works in progress, and I would like to invite a round of applause from my fellow storytellers in acknowledgement of the vulnerability and bravery they display in sharing their humanity, their work in progress here tonight.
Throughout these stories, we hope to highlight that rigid ideas about masculinity and gender relations are socially created, and changeable, and that at the same time that individual men are responsible for their actions. Stereotypical notions of how boys and men supposedly should be as men also contribute to many preventable social ills and public health issues for people of all genders. We aim to celebrate men's hearts and humanity, to discuss costs of rigid masculinity norms, and to present some more expansive examples of what healthy, self expressed humanness in men can look like.
If any of the stories that you hear tonight move you in a way such that you'd like to process your reaction in private with someone, there are trained advocates present from the local domestic and sexual violence resource centers, Family Violence Project, and the Sexual Assault Crisis and Support Center. Kathleen, Michelle, and John, would you please stand? Thank you. These folks will provide free and confidential support for anyone who wants it during or after this event. Additionally, Emily Schusterbauer is the confidential Title IX advocate here on Colby's campus. Emily, would you please stand? Emily is available to provide support as well.
After the 6 stories that we will share momentarily, there will also be a chance for audience members to be in dialogue with us, Menstory Project participants, and our group's facilitator, Dan Kipp, who is present with us via Zoom tonight. We look forward to hearing your reactions, holding space for any experiences you may be inspired to share, and responding to any questions you may have.
We invite you all to snap and use ASL sign language for applause if you feel moved by something you've heard during our stories. We also ask you to please hold all your audible applause until after all 6 stories have been shared.
Finally, we thank you for bearing an active witness to the stories we have to share, for holding space for our vulnerability with empathy, curiosity, and criticality. And now, without further ado, we present to you the Colby College chapter of the Men's Story Project.
Hi, I'm Alex, they, them pronouns, and I'm actually reading Sam's story, thank you, who wasn't able to be here tonight, so I am presenting in his stead. I don't want to do this. My palms feel sweaty. I really don't want to do this. My mouth feels like it's filled with sand. I really, really don't want to do this. My heart is pounding, so much so I'm sure she can feel it. I can't do it. I must do it. I turn in my car seat and look at her. I ask hesitantly, "Is it okay if I kiss you?" She rolls her eyes at me. "Why are you making it so fucking weird? Just be a fucking man and do it." Be a man. It echoes through my mind as I lean in forward and kiss her. She tells me she had a good time tonight. Then she gets out and leaves. I'm 17 years old, and I just had my first kiss. But as I'm driving home, the only thing I can think about is how I never want to see her again. Why couldn't I have just done it? Why couldn't I have just been a man and kissed her? Deep down, I knew the answer. I wasn't ready to kiss just yet, but I'm not willing to consider that. Ever since my guy friends found out this girl had a crush on me, I faced nonstop questions about when I was going to see her, kiss her, have sex. I'd hear things like, "What the fuck, you haven't kissed her yet? Just do it already." And, "She's hot, dude. If you don't step up, someone else might." I hated hearing this stuff, but I felt as if I didn't have a choice. I felt like I owed it to them to prove I was a real man, that I was capable of having a girlfriend, and more importantly, that I wanted one. The weirdest thing is that I knew exactly what peer pressure was. We talked about it in health class over and over again, and this was the perfect example. Yet it didn't really feel like it applied here. They weren't doing anything wrong, they just wanted the best for me. but it still led me to do things I didn't want to do. I think the main reason it didn't register was that however much pressure I felt from my guy friends, I put a ton more on myself. Almost every night, I'd think about how at 17, I still had never had my first kiss. In my head, that was abnormal and reflected a failure on my part. The longer I waited, the more it felt like I would never be able to kiss a girl. And if I couldn't, then how would I ever be able to be in a healthy relationship? As a kid, I always imagined getting married, having kids, and living a life that at the time seemed standard. But as time went on, it felt like that life may have been out of reach. In some ways, the first kiss was sort of relieving, some of those thoughts went away. But I still felt uneasy, that I should have enjoyed it more, that I should have gone further, that it should have just been better in general. In my head, I had to be like every guy I saw on TV, that I read about in books, and most importantly, I had to match the macho facades that my guy friends put on. 4 years later, I sit here, knowing that I'll probably never be the hyper-masculine guy that society tells me I'm supposed to be. And that's okay, and I've accepted that for the most part. It hasn't really been easy. In my senior year of high school, my dad told me he thought I was gay because I didn't chase after girls like he did when he was my age. At the beginning of my freshman year of college, I had my second kiss, which was only slightly less awkward than the first. But I slowly grew to become aware of who I am and what my limits are. Understanding that I have no control over the things that make me feel uncomfortable made me feel like I had more control over what I was capable of doing, and also what I wanted to pursue. After the second kiss, I felt kind of down, but I did admit to myself that it was way better than the first. This new mindset led me to feel a bit more okay with the idea of kissing, and so I stuck around for another, and another, and now, a year and a half later, that second girl has become my girlfriend, with whom I feel more comfortable than anyone else I know. I managed to break through my toxic cycle of thinking, the cycle that prevented me from feeling comfortable in my own skin. Now, as I say this, I'm aware it might sound as if I'm freed forever, that I have never since, nor will I ever feel as if I must emulate the ideal, stereotypical type of masculinity. Unfortunately, this simply isn't the case. It isn't as if one day I woke up feeling different, forever changed. I still have those uncomfortable thoughts, that I like excitement over things that testosterone-filled guys like, or that if I'm not manly enough, maybe, just maybe, my girlfriend won't want to be with me. I'm still a work in progress, and growing takes time, but it's well worth it, because it's a road that leads to nothing but self-love and empowerment. Even just being aware of the fact that I've grown and that I'm on a positive path makes me feel better about myself and makes me feel hopeful for the future. To any who are just starting on this path, or to those who have yet to find a way out of their own masculinity problem, I'd like to share with you one of my greatest takeaways from participating in this Men's Story project. Contrary to what many of us think, there is more than one way to be masculine. In fact, there are as many distinct masculinities as there are masculine identifying people on Earth. Your job is not to become the one you see on TV, but to explore the one you were born with. So I urge you to go out and explore and always leave room for self-love. Thank you.
E.Y. Harburg, composer of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, eloquently stated, "Words make you think thoughts. Music makes you feel a feeling, but a song makes you feel a thought." As I stand here before you, in spite of my decade and a half of music performance, I'm shaken to my core by fear. Beyond my own voice, the overwhelming silence of this performance makes my skin crawl, my shoulders tense, and my entire mind go blank. Where my thoughts are typically accompanied by the bombast of jazz and blues, the only song that plays in my head now is one of the Panjarecki-inspired ease, dread. I can't even find the words for it. But it's the same kind of dread that not only filled my only thoughts, but every fiber of my being as an adolescent. You see, as a male Vietnamese American, I grew up with the expectation that not only I would take care of my parents someday, but also any grandparents that were alive, as was the norm for the eldest child. So for much of my life, especially when I was entering middle school, and to this day, my grandmother would ask me what I plan on doing with my life. So she'd know whether or not she should hurry up and die already, so that not to burden me with any extra things in case I get nowhere in life. I truthfully didn't really have any extraordinary skills when I was younger, and so my dad made it a point to expose me to as many things as he thought I would enjoy as often as he could, because he knew that if I was anything like him, or my mother, to be fair, that I'd not rest until I saw results. It wasn't until I mentioned to him at the ripe age of 9 that I enjoyed some of his old records and tapes that he realized music might be the way forward. Now, it was just as much my father as it was Ives and Coltrane's and Mingus and Davis that took me to the instrument night that they were having at the local school. But it was my father who truly let me have at it, ensuring me that he'd stay there for hours if I wanted to try out every single instrument there. But once we arrived, the only thing that was for me was the bright and shiny golden saxophone that was perched atop an ornate instrument stand, practically screaming, "I'm not going to be yours. You're mine." I can't help to think of Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, a film that centers around a platoon of prospective US Marines as they navigate their way through the war in Vietnam. Specifically, the scene where they're in boot camp and are marching in step with their rifles in one hand and their family jewels in the other, with the infamous chant of, "This is my rifle, this is my gun, this is for fighting, this is for fun." I felt the exact same way about this hunk of metal. This is the same affinity I had for it, which I proudly carried throughout the first half of my musical career up until my junior year of high school. The problem was, before I got that instrument, it was the exact same problem I would have for a majority of my life: money. The rental fees were just too exorbitant. Forget about buying a new one. Neither my father nor I would take no for an answer, though. He searched and searched and searched and eventually found me an instrument. And in the years since, I've tried to pay my way forward through the craft that I've elected to hone. I've taught and conducted in several ensembles, given out numerous private lessons, and even earned a spot to perform at one of the most prestigious stages in the world, Carnegie Hall. Music has always been a privilege in my life, and I've used it in practically every application imaginable. Delving into the fundamental physics behind creating music and the complexities of the human ear, and its preference for simpler ratios and the interval consonants for you guys don't care about that. Busking for music on the streets trying to make a quick buck when my parents needed help with the bills. Avoiding writing a senior thesis in high school by creating a programmatic piece detailing my entire life with arrangements and original compositions into a 10-minute showcase to express raw emotions and sentiments that I'd never outwardly display in a million years. Or just screaming the words I can't ever physically say out loud through my instrument. But of all the uses I've found in my 20 short years, 21 now, wow, time flies, there have been none more impactful than that of my great uncle and I, 7 years ago. Ever since the groundbreaking documentary, Alive Inside, origin of the immensely viral clip of an elderly gentleman who, at first, appears gaunt and grim and lifeless, but when the interviewer placed his headphones over his ears, blasting the songs of his youth, he seemed reinvigorated. I've pivoted my aspirations from neurosurgery to music therapy as it combines my love of music and that of medicine. The fact of the matter is, I've worked in an ER and as an EMT for quite a while now, and the kind of blasé, meat locker approach to patient care is not something I'm overly fond of. The air of competitiveness and sheer force of will was something that appealed to my competitive nature at first, but under the bravado and ego of every single person that I worked with, there was this fragile understanding of social interactions that became almost required the more and more trauma and terror they had to treat. I enjoy the notion of providing long-term personal and individualized care to our elders. Having just seen the clip I just mentioned, and knowing my great uncle, who I had slowly seen succumb to his bout with Alzheimer's over the course of my elementary and middle school years, I was determined to help free him from his aphakic state through music. Having handpicked Vietnamese music for him. The issue? I had selected modern Vietnamese pop songs he'd never heard before, and so I was unable to elicit any reaction. That was until the music had autoplayed to the Vietnamese national anthem, and he showed immense recognition. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to me at the time, it was the communist Vietnamese national anthem, and my great uncle, who was a refugee from the war, needless to say, emoted plenty and said quite a lot. As poor as my Vietnamese was at the time, it was apparent to all that the agony of being forced to stand at attention to and sing along with an anthem that did not represent the home that he had always known had swept over him like the monsoon surges which threatened to drown him during his imprisonment during those reconditioning camps he was forced to stay in. And this moment eats at me. In spite of my best intentions, due to my negligence and ignorance, I traumatized a revered family member. It was at this moment, however, that I was struck with an inexplicable but fervid desire They had the same kind of intense patriotism or passion about something in my life as my great uncle did, to the point where even when I'm a drug-addled, demented, senile, and any number of adjectives that I can't come up with right at the moment, I would just be as emphatic and blatant as I was when I was younger. My father spoke to me shortly after the incident and expressed similar sentiments, how he dreamed of the Vietnam that he loved and had to flee himself, how he wished I could see it in its prime, and how maybe one day I would take up arms in his stead and liberate our homeland. Needless to say, he was less than enthused when I told him that I had long desired to attend graduate school to make certain that if I am granted the opportunity, I would be able to preserve the memories of our elders so that the Vietnam that we learn for can live on in memory and not through bloodshed. It bothered me that my father would have such an adverse effect to my use of my gift and talents that he helped bestow upon me all those years ago. It bothered me how he couldn't see that saving Vietnamese culture was inextricably linked to other things beyond violence and retaliation. Words make you think thoughts. Music makes you feel feelings. But a song makes you feel a thought. And though tragically, for many of our aging population, music has become the only way for these individuals to express any of their thoughts. It appears for men like my father and great uncle that the only music they could hear when prompted about their motherland are air raid sirens and war chants. Today, I have seen many of the same outdated views that individuals like my father creep back into seemingly innocuous conversations. Tiger, why would you ever consider being a nurse when you could be a doctor like a real man? If you're interested in a career in politics, be a politician like Zelensky, someone who's not afraid to kick ass. Why are you interested in learning how to cook? Isn't your girlfriend Catherine a good cook already? The truth is, in spite of his archaic ideals, whether or not my father can see it, he has already given me all the tools needed to reclaim our culture. You remember that beautiful saxophone that I mentioned earlier that I carried all throughout my middle school and high school years? It shone like black opal, and it was this beautiful matte black finish with amazing detailing. Though my father, I'm sure, would rather me use it to bash some commie over the head, in reality, I've used it to reimagine classic Vietnamese ballads and folk songs, incorporating their unique timbres, instrumentations, and melodies into the compositions and performances of myself and my peers. It has been my experience that the only way to truly shake the yoke of intergenerational trauma and deep-rooted mistidings is not to further ostracize, alienate, and attack, but to reharmonize, making the most of what is available to you and making something beautiful out of all the ugly in the world. I could find no better personification of this ideal than of that same instrument I keep referring to. Though what my father gifted to me was an onyx dream that he apparently sniped on eBay, in actuality, my father spent a nightmarish amount of time dumpster diving for it, snatching it out of the bin behind a music and art store, sending it to my uncle to have it refurbished, according to my aunt. And though I despair at the thought of my father's limitations due to his trauma, I might never find the words to describe how appreciative I am of all his sacrifices and faith. And luckily, with my instrument in hand, I'll never have to. Thank you.
This is a more lighthearted story compared to other stories shared here, but yeah, this was something that happened way back in high school, which seems like forever ago, even though it was only like less than a year. So I went to this relatively nationalist school in South India that had a lot of rules on dress code, hair, other forms of what they called stylistic choices. And I didn't fully fit the traditional heterosexual male mold that they tried to enforce on me. I chose to have long hair, and it often got me into a lot of trouble with the disciplinary committee until they sort of gave up on trying to correct me because I didn't listen, or rather didn't care about them, because their rules made no sense to me. However, it's first important to have context as to how this place was or still is. Anyway, so back in sophomore year of high school, I was having pretty bad issues with mental health. It was a pretty low part of my life And well, actually, I was depressed, and I'm in a much better place now. And so, yeah, in your sophomore years, very important academically, and there's a lot of stress associated with that. And I was also dealing with a lot of drama with my personal relationships, and was just generally exhausted with just life as a whole. And as it tends to happen in high school, um, that's also when I first started having these conversations about like mental health and how I was having issues. And it was hard because we were always taught to ignore it growing up, be brave or strong. There was no room for displaying vulnerability or emotion. And this one teacher back then saw some scar marks in my hand was understandably concerned, and I was taken to like forced to meet a counselor. And that might have been the first time that I talked about it to an actual adult. And it was interesting because that person told me a lot about myself that I knew, but just wasn't ready to hear openly and accept, because that's the society I was brought up in. And I was living in denial about my struggles with depression to the point where everything was numb. And those cuts were to prove to myself to a certain extent that I could still feel something. And of course, after this, I had to go talk to the principal, and all she said was, "Nathan, I know you've had this conversation with the counselor, but you'll have to let this go. You can't be sad because you're a very strong young man." Strong young man is what she said. And since I, in her mind, had a very good life, and there were people who were much worse off than I was, and I was young and had my whole life ahead of me, apparently, I was not allowed to be sad. And she couldn't understand why I was feeling the way I was. Of course, she didn't really know how to help, and she was a nice person, and she was always nice to me, and I greatly respected her. But so it's this school and the broader region. It tries to avoid conversations like this, and opts to dodge it, and like it opts to dodge these problems, and like any idea of like non-conformity, instead of like trying to acknowledge that these issues exist and try to fix them. Of course, a year and a half later, as we all know, COVID happened, and I was at home for 9 months. I grew out my hair while I was at home, and when we went back to school, we had, I believe, 2 more months left of in-person classes, and I didn't have the patience to listen to a disciplinary committee of all things. And at that point in life, I was completely disillusioned with how our school and like the broader systems of gender in India worked. So I went back with longer hair, and I was immediately flagged by the disciplinary committee. And for a meeting, they were like, I can't have long hair because it's against their rules." And I was like, why? This is what I want to do. I like having my hair long. Why does this school have any say in something as like stupid and surface level as my hair length? You can't just wish away parts of my personality. That's what you tried to do once already. You can't do that again. And then this guy who was from the disciplinary committee was absolutely baffled, because the cultural norms that come with masculinity in India, as is in most parts of the world, are enforced by intimidation. And if that's what you use to get people to act in a certain way, and maybe your actions aren't justified. And at that point, I didn't care anymore, and I was not going to let this guy I'm not going to see in 2 more months bully me into cutting my hair and changing myself because of some bullshit baseless standard. That's just stupid. Anyway, so he was like, "Oh, if you want to have long hair, you should wear the girls' uniform, because stupid private schools have stupid uniforms and dress codes and whatnot." And I was like, "From when? I can do it tomorrow if you like." And this guy was just baffled because it was funny because he was like, "Come ask me tomorrow," because no one's asked him that before. He didn't know what to tell me, and I went there tomorrow because I had nothing to lose, and he just took me to the principal because he couldn't come up with an answer, and I go there again. I haven't had an in-depth conversation with the principal since sophomore year, and I go there and just like, you can't be this way. There's expectations. I was like, why? Why does the length of my hair have to affect the way that I'm perceived by people? How does that make any sense at all? They have like a bunch of rules. Where do they come from? They can't tell me. Why do we listen to baseless rules? And like, now I'm able to name that those absurd rules were like based on traditional stereotypical norms that were based on the gender binary. They were based on the expectation that one's sex assigned at birth will naturally align with one's gender identity. And these rules were founded as a purely social construct, and it makes it harder for humans to like explore and express their true selves. And uh, they these rules they're founded by men, and they teach boys from a young age what's valued and what's respected, and this logic, and paired with this culture that's purely by intimidation and violence to get what you think you deserve. It creates conditions where it's okay and normal for boys and men to harass, coerce, and assault um, other individuals. And it's this logic that makes like justifies any as a target of violence anyone who identifies as like non-binary or like queer or anything other than the perceived normal. And I wish I'd had this understanding at the time, and I didn't. I instead advocated for myself by using logic that I thought the institution would maybe take seriously, which is insult to authority, which always works. And in the end, they never did let me have long hair as a personal choice. And what's even more funny is that school changed their uniform policy literally the year after I graduated, opting for unisex uniforms for all students. And when we acknowledge that sex and gender are largely human-made social constructs, the way that humans identify and express their gender can be expansive and even limitless. We stop making arbitrary rules about how to dress, how to talk, how to wear our hair, how to present ourselves. And I think we need more of that in the world. Thank you all for hearing my truths.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex, and I use they, them pronouns. Sometimes I feel like a failure that can't get anything done. And there's this voice in the back of my head just repeating that, pointing at things I have to do, asking me why I'm not doing them. That little voice feels like a needle, working its way into my head, leaving me feeling numb and lifeless. The worst part is that sometimes I feel like I need the voice, and that without it there to point at my flaws and punish me for them, I wouldn't get anything done at all. That's certainly what the voice thinks, and it tends to have the full support of the society around me. All screaming that I have things to do and that inaction is failure. But there's one voice more prominent in my life than the rest, and while I was home over spring break, I told my father that it's his voice in my head driving that needle. Want to be told isn't the best way to put it. I more screamed it at him in the midst of an argument about whether or not I was going to finish submitting my projects that night. We didn't really talk much for the next few days, and we certainly didn't talk about what I said, no matter how much I wished he'd come forward and apologize. We didn't have any real conversations until 5 days later as I was packing my car to return to campus. And as we were talking, one of the first things my dad said was, "I love you, son." The astute among you may have just noticed an issue. As someone that identifies as non-binary and uses they/them pronouns, son as the term for a male child doesn't exactly line up. And my dad noticed too, quickly catching himself and apologizing. But I'm not actually sure if it bothered me. Like, in that very moment, when he caught himself and apologized, I think I was happier that he said it than that if he didn't. Because sure, son doesn't traditionally line up with being non-binary. Generally, it's a term for referring to your male child. But facial hair is also associated with Western ideas of masculinity, and this is where I realized wearing a mask makes this line make less sense. But I still have that. Having facial hair, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, playing board games, and many other things I do all the time are also traditionally masculine. But I still do those things and have no intention to stop. In fact, there aren't really any traditionally non-binary things I could be doing in the first place. And either way, it's all fucking bullshit. Because these are things I like, and tradition is a bunch of poppycock trying to tell us that because that's the way it's done now, it must have always been done this way and must be done this way forever. But I refuse that. When my dad looked me in the eyes and told me how much I meant to him, how much me being his son meant to him, he was seeing me. And I cherish that far more than aligning with some stupid tradition that wants to take it away from me. Thank you.